So we talked earlier about a lot what's happening global versus local. Let's focus on, I want to hang on the word addressable, right? So addressable. How does that fit into the world of that we hear that everybody's buying video up funnel on reach and frequency and audience? How do we reconcile those two from a planning and buying perspective?
Well, I think from a planning perspective, it's always been out there. We've always had other proxies that we've used to kind of deliver on the idea of reaching a particular profile of a person, whether that's a demographic or a content type, a different piece. But the idea of going even further and really truly aggregating smaller audiences that are truly relevant to a specific profile is where we want to go. And so from a global perspective, how do we do that consistently? For us, we've seen it actually happening in every single market, the idea of shifting more and more dollars into this addressable piece, really taking off in countries like France, UK in particular. I think a lot of the dynamics of those marketplaces as it relates to the economics and the politics and the amount of folks involved in the video buying or just media buying in general is a little bit more smaller, and it can move quicker, and it's interesting to see a lot of those dynamics occur. So in the case of France, we've seen a very large shift in where we're going on that front, bringing in these profiles to the bear, going out and buying inventory on the open exchanges, a lot of focus on the private marketplaces. The intriguing piece that I think across everywhere is just everyone's leaning in, buy side and sell side. No one's fully sure of what the real dynamics are going to be long term. You've got a lot of economic things to consider, but how do we continue to drive that education, have open conversations? I think the dynamic of that conversation between buyer and seller is fundamentally changing. We've always said it's been a world of negotiation before. In the future, it's a world of collaboration. How do we really actually sit down and make sure that the concerns on the sell side are being addressed, so they're opening up more and more of that inventory? Because for all of us at the end of the day, it's about making a smarter direct buy, really, right? We want to find an impression that truly matches up to what we're looking for. Well, how do we facilitate that? You've got a lot of concerns to consider, and we got to work through, and that's part of the big educational piece. And so from a global perspective, that conversation, it's fascinating. It goes on in every single market. And as people get on board, more and more volume starts to come through, and I think there's a lot of fascinating insights that we get out of that, and how do we kind of continue to scale the technology piece, the data piece, most important, the measurement piece, because ultimately this is around shifting dollars from the television side into the online side and giving clients confidence that $1 spent online is equivalent to $1 spent on television. And you've got
how's that working out?
Yeah, it's pacing. We'll put it that way. It's definitely going to have to. You're offsetting 75 years of practice, right? And there's a lot of.
Is there sticker shock? Like when you start to, Brett's new product is super sexy, right? Because you can take reach and frequency at the top of the funnel and then drill down and pull data in, and all of a sudden you go from like an $11 effective CPM to a $91 effective CPM. And I mean, is there, addressable means more valuable, ergo higher CPM, right?
Yeah, the critical piece is the idea around, well, what's driving the first allocation? That's sort of, if you do a pure CPM basis, to your point, sticker shock can become a challenge simply because if we're getting into a much more targeted buy, in theory, have less waste. And so if you actually look on a cost per point basis, the win's there. And so how do we basically drive that conversation forward as an industry? How do we facilitate a platform that has commonality across all these different video channels so that when we say cost per point here, everyone can see that? And I think when you put it in that context, all of a sudden, the output is more important than the input. And at that point in time, the CPMs start to become less and less of a concern. And I think that's the real challenge. I mean, you have to get the whole ecosystem and kind of think about things in that capacity, and the time it takes to do that is certainly a long one. You have to have patience and have to have a kind of a consistent conversation. But most importantly, how do we bring that data to bear on all fronts so that people can have that confidence and see the points that we're trying to make?
So can we take a step back? I want to talk about the flow of dollars right now. So just within the Viviki sort of family, what percentage of total digital served video, right? Let's use that, not necessarily online, but digital served video sort of across the ecosystem right now is flowing through programmatic.
So I think programmatic's one way to describe it. I actually say it's on a spectrum. On one end of the spectrum is experiential type of buys. The idea we're going to do a very custom sponsorship, a very deep engagement with a particular publisher, and really build an experience that consumers are going to come and interact with. The other end of it is the addressability, right? And so in the realm of addressability, that is the idea of reaggregating audiences across any number of sources. Programmatic falls in that area. So too do aggregators and all sorts of other entities. So I think in the realm of addressable, the idea is more around 30%, 40%. You're going to have certain clients that certainly skew one way versus the other in the aggregate. When you drill down into side addressable, how much is programmatic and going through open exchanges, and how much is going through aggregators and how much is going through other things. I think that's where it gets a little more dicey, but the idea is a wholesale shift in this audience buying.
So the reason so just to lead you, the reason I care is because my next question was going to be, and how much of the pure play programmatic, as we're defining it in this form today, is actually bought through a private exchange that you guys have set up and facilitated?
Yeah, so I'd say from our perspective, the volume as it relates to the relative spend is below 10% as it gets into these direct sort of connections. But I think the interest levels over the past 12 months on both buy side and sell side of how do we bring that together is way outpacing the percent of spend against that. And for that reason, we have a lot of belief that, hey, we're on the cusp of really cracking this. And it goes back to, I said, to that education with the publisher. I mean, you're going into upfront models, right, where people had long-term commitments to revenue, and that's an addictive thing to break on the buy side, on the sell side. And when you get into potentially RTB, race to the bottom ideas, like concerns around why CPMs are just going to keep plummeting down, I'm going to hold back on these things, or I'm going to kind of focus on the experiential side because I have a lot of financial reason to want to go do that. But I think as we continue to get people's awareness of how we bring those dollars in, and in fact there's upsides all around, we're getting into a spot where we're going to see more and more opportunities to do more programmatic come to bear, and the private exchanges, that'll drive it, I think, more so than the open marketplace.
So let's take a step back again. I would like to talk about Europe for a little bit, because your global purview is a really valuable and unique perspective. What's happening in Europe? Because it's interesting, right? Because when you have addressability, if you don't have optimized creative as well, it's like the pointing fingers of, is it the creative or the media buying? Whose fault is it if it doesn't perform, right? In Europe, localization is table stakes. So is that an accelerant for programmatic? Like, what are you seeing specifically market by market, and then pan-Europe as a whole?
Sure, I mean, on a market by market basis, we have teams in place in each market, because a lot of this, to your point, is localized, and it's, I would say today, more localized around inventory access. So in the UK, in France, the idea around private marketplaces have really taken off and scaled. It's working very closely with a smaller group of broadcasters to really open up inventory or other premium sort of outlets. And so I would say in your earlier question around that mix in Europe is much, much more aggressive as it relates to the private pieces, simply because more and more are engaging on that. I think on the creative side and how you talk to individual audiences, that is absolutely a piece for the industry that's still got to solve for. I mean, I think today media is always kind of outpaced from a technology and capability perspective relative to creative, simply because it's a bit easier for media. I mean, going out and finding individuals and aggregating and using technology to do that is one thing, but crafting stories that really will communicate to people in a cadence that makes a lot of sense, that's a very challenging and long-term thing that's got to be thought about differently. So we were actually in a client session yesterday in Minneapolis with someone very focused on this particular topic, I'll put it that way. And it was the clear point was, hey, we're going really fast on this stuff. How does that engagement with the creative agencies, how does that engagement with the strategists that are driving the messaging to speak to these individual audience, be it in display, video, where it may be, is absolutely going to be something over the next 12 to 18 months. I think we're going to see, as an industry, a lot of focus on, because that is, as we pivoted Viviki from just servicing the media shops inside of Publicis to actually servicing the broader footprint across the board, that's a big remit for us. How does this creative technology integrate into existing systems that we have inside our own creative shops? How does that also create connectivity into all these other platform applications? And so for us, really, as I mentioned at the beginning, our core focus is around how do we enable this platform that's going to help our teams really deliver on this, and creative technology into this platform is clearly a big, big next piece.
And this is what I think is really interesting from the publisher side of the business right now. And I look at my client portfolio, and the conversations I'm having with my clients, who are typically publishers, are, is your competitive advantage in content, or is it in technology?